And we're live, I think. I'm not completely sure, but it seems as if we are live. Hey everybody. Unfiltered Christian here, coming to you live from where people eat their crayons. And and today we have a very special guest, one Jaime Castillas. He is in Caracas. This is Venezuelan Incognito contact in Caracas. He is going to be speaking with us about politics, about current events there. And I want to really focus on current events if possible. So let me bring everybody up to speed on Venezuela. Venezuela is in South America on the north central coast. Population's about 30 million, 31 million. It's half as large as Alaska, but about a third larger than Texas. So that should give Americans some idea of how big this is. The Constitution of Venezuela is their 26th such constitution. They've had 26. It was ratified in, I believe, 1999, around the time Hugo Chavez came to power. Chavez established the socialist policies of the state that we are seeing now. Around that same time, oil prices exploded in the early 2000s, giving Venezuela a massive amount of wealth, which Chavez used in a typical socialist manner to temporarily reduce poverty and subsidize commodities for the people. This did cause some economic issues that we'll get into, of course, and Chavez died of cancer in 2013. The Constitution requires an election, which the vice president, Chavez's vice president, Nicolas Maduro, won. Right now, the country is a mess with shocking levels of inflation, unrest, corruption, poverty, human rights violations, violence, and a murder rate that makes Caracas one of the most dangerous places in the world. And there's been a new wave of unrest in the country following recent elections. Joining me now, Jaime Castillas. What did I miss? Did I miss anything? How did we get here? And what's been the story since this spring? And by the way, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Of course.
Well, yeah, that was a very good, that was an impressively well-researched synopsis and very well put together as well. You hit the key elements quite well. It's a long, yeah, it's been a long process. It's been 20 years of revolution, and of course, you're not going to be able to fit that into a 2-minute introduction. I'd say that there is no way to fit it into a 5-hour show of all the things that have happened here since Chavez came to power. And if you're going to include the reasons that led him to get to power, it's going to be even longer. Now, the Venezuelan people have always had to endure, I would call it an unfortunate series of choices regarding its leaders. We have not been able to pick good leadership for the last maybe 40 or 50 years or more. Yeah,
this is a long-running problem.
Yeah, it's a long-running problem, and I would say that we've created for ourselves a culture of dependence, and we're able to sustain it when oil prices go.
I think we lost him. We might have lost him. Jaime, can you hear me?
More than the previous guy, or the guy who's currently in power. And we've been doing that consistently since 1973 or thereabouts, when we had the first big oil boom. And it hasn't worked out. It's just led to more and more poverty. That isn't to say that the left doesn't have a role to play in our country, because our country's really very there's a lot of people who are suffering the most extreme of poverties. But we have not known how to choose from within the plethora of leadership of leftist leaderships that we don't really have a right wing in our country, and that's another one of the things that I've been noticing that people are calling the new, you know, interim president. They're calling him a far right figure, and they're calling the political parties that are in the National Assembly. They're calling them far right. He belongs to a party called Voluntad Popular, which is popular will, which is actually a member of the International Socialists. So
Mhm.
it baffles me to hear people saying that this is some sort of far right movement, or even a movement from the right. In Venezuela, there is no established right. There's a couple of tiny parties um, that nobody really pays any attention to because they have no popular support. And there's one center right party which had a little bit more traction, but that's about it. It's really it's all the political left, and we've been that way, since our democratic process began in earnest, which was, I think, after after the well, I would call it a coup. I would call it a civilian military movement to oust Perez Jimenez in the 50s, in the early 50s. So we've been governed by some very, very capable people, particularly in the 50s and 60s. We had President Raul Leoni and President Betancourt, which were very, very good presidents, and they started pushing forward. They had their social programs, but they were pushing development forward at an astounding rate. At that time, Venezuela was projected to become a regional power, a regional superpower, or at least
Mhm.
an economic superpower. We were developing faster than any other country in the region, and we had more public works and more, you know, investment, foreign and domestic, than any other country in the region, and we were projected to become the I guess the beacon of South America.
And
And
what well, I guess my question is, I know in the early 2000s, oil prices kind of recovered, and that obviously meant a lot of wealth flowing into the country. So it's not like a standard country that I think Americans kind of have this idea of a third world country that maybe in some cases doesn't have a natural resource to tap into. They don't have a lot to offer the outside world, and therefore they are poor. And in Venezuela, this is very much not the case. You guys have oil. In fact, you have a lot of oil, right?
well, yes, some people say that we have the largest proven reserves in the world. So that's quite a lot, I would say. But our oil, we have a particularly heavy kind of crude, which requires a lot of processing. It requires a special kind of, it requires special procedures in order to, you know, make it light enough or to extract, the byproducts of oil. It requires a lot of work. I don't know the English word for this.
Refinery, probably
Yeah,
refining.
yeah, that's it. We need yes, that's it. So it requires a heavy, bout of refining processes so that they can be useful. But even though that is the case, we still have, some of the largest, the world's largest proven reserves. There are very few places that have that capacity to refine our heavy crude. The United States is one of the places, and China is another. So we usually, though back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the United States, and even the 2000s, the United States was our main trading partner. We sent the great majority of the oil that we produced to the United States, and back then we were as much as 7 or 8% of the United States oil imports. So we had a hefty chunk of your oil purchases, I guess.
Well, and that's a lot. I mean, if you think about how many people there are in the United States. That's several hundred million, and most of them own at least one vehicle that requires some sort of an oil
Right.
product to use. So that's, I mean, that's a heck of a lot of oil if you think about it.
Right.
And obviously, that wealth hasn't really helped the country out that much. Obviously, with Chavez mismanaging it and subsidizing things, and from what I was reading, it seemed like there were good times for a while, and then it declined very quickly.
Yeah. Well, that's the perennial story of the country. In the 1970s, we also had the same boom. The president that back then, his name uh, was Carlos Andres Perez, and he used the oil to create 1,000 social programs and something called pleno empleo, which is complete employment. He called it complete employment. So you had people whose job it was to sit in an elevator and operate the buttons in the elevator in every public building. That was a job.
Hmm.
Well, quite the sinecure, if you ask me. They were usually reading a book. So yeah, that was a job. And so aside from that, there were many social programs like free lunches and free school lunches in every public school and all that that you've seen in the United States recently. We had that in the 70s. It worked well while the oil prices were high, but the government never really invested it in anything. In I guess we've never really had an open and free market, and it was never and the government never really diversified its own investments and didn't make the funds available for enterprise. It just gave it away. That happened in the 70s. Then in the 80s, we had a major crash and we had, a recession. And then we had a little bit of an oil bump and then it went down again in the 90s. And so by the time 1998 arrived, which was when Chavez won his first election, we were struggling pretty. We had an economic contraction and an inflation that were quite considerable. I think inflation had reached double digits at that time, and
Which seems low by comparison now, if I understand.
Oh, of course. I mean, we're talking about this year. The inflation, the projected inflation for 2019 is around 10 million%.
Jeez.
Yeah, and the actual inflation last year was around 1,000,000%.
This reminds me of the stories of Weimar Germany, where payroll was delivered several times a day in wheelbarrows full of cash,
Yeah,
because that's just what was necessary to keep up with the inflation. And I've heard stories of the wheelbarrows being stolen and the cash being left, because a wheelbarrow full of cash is worth the wheelbarrow, not the cash.
that sounds about right. Except now we have electronic money, so it's actually even easier. I believe the American term for it is quantitative easing.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's not exactly the same thing because we don't have a Fed. We just have a central bank, and the central bank just deposits money that comes out of nowhere into people's accounts if they are a member of, the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, the Socialist Party. Like if they're a party member and they are in the social programs, they just receive money. Like over the holidays, we had a free Christmas gift to everyone of just 20,000, 10,000 bolivares for everyone. Just here, it's in your bank account.
Yeah.
Enjoy. And all that money came out of nowhere. It's not backed by anything, and there's no there's not even an algorithm or any rhyme or reason. It's just random generation out of nowhere. But getting back to this whole thing. So yes, we've always been riding that roller coaster of oil prices because we've always been dependent on the price of oil because we don't really have a strong economy, and the state kind of has always wanted to have control of the entire productive machine. I guess the means of production. I guess they've always up until now they'd always allowed for private industry to handle things like food production and steel and oil, and there was during the 80s, there was a massive, I guess, denationalization of resources because the state couldn't handle it because the oil prices went down, and these businesses weren't providing any profits. They were just losses for the state, so they let them go.
Mm.
And so the contraction came. People were very unhappy, and they chose Chavez because Chavez promised the world and beyond. He said that, he rode the wave of discontent from the injustices that really did exist, because it's very difficult to, like, it wasn't an easy life for the average Venezuelan back in 1996.
Right.
And somehow his rise into power, for some, happy coincidence, at least to him, coincided with one of the most massive increases in oil prices in history. Like, our oil reached $120 a barrel from
Mhm.
8. I think it was at 8 when he came into power. So that's a 15 time multiplication. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
And
So
in a way, he kind of got lucky that that happened right when he took power from the sounds of it. Jaime? We lose him from time to time. Hang on there, folks. There are little glitches in the internet. Either that or it's on my end. I'm not really sure. Let me check the bandwidth. That looks good so far. And we're back, I think. Jaime, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you dropped out about 15 minutes ago, so we'll just kind of expect for there to be a radio blackout every so often of about a minute.
All right.
But I was
Um,
sorry, I was saying that Chavez got lucky in some ways because that's right when the oil exploded in terms of its price, and it wasn't so much what he did as much as the fact that he just flat out got lucky. Would you say there's some accuracy to that?
yeah, absolutely. It was pure luck. Luck. Of course, he sold it using he created an entire state propaganda machine, and he sold it as something that he did. And there might be some truth to that. I mean, the guy was a very charismatic leader. He
Mhm.
was. So I don't doubt that he probably lobbied other members of OPEC to cut back on production in order to increase prices, because it would, it 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 was to to everyone in OPEC's advantage to do so. So there might be a little bit of truth to that. Like, he probably rode the wave and I guess fed the fire, but it was pure luck. It was pure luck. At the time, the international oil inventories were low, and there hadn't been advancements in shale oil extraction, I think it's called,
Mhm.
fracking. And Norway hadn't developed the capacity, the surpluses that it has right now. Colombia hadn't begun extracting oil. By the way, Chavez's undoing was taking over PDVSA, because when he when there was a coup, and this is actually a coup. There was a coup in 2002 to oust Chavez. Many of the people who worked in PDVSA were not happy about the way he was taking over the industry. He wanted to militarize it, and they joined the strikes that ultimately led to his ousting in 2002. So Chavez's response to that was to fire 18,000 of the most capable people in the industry. And those people just ended up going to the United States, Mexico, and Colombia, and helping those countries build up their oil industries, so that now our neighbors are, large oil producers that compete with our own industry geographically, I guess, and even for the same market, I guess. And another world superpower that also, I guess, has taken advantage of the Venezuelan situation is Russia.
Mhm.
Although they have not really claimed any of our capable um, industry executives. They have taken advantage of the fact that oil production has declined over the past several years to, I think, a third or less than a third of what we were putting out before. And so they've actually taken over some of the markets that we had.
As well as your country losing some of those skilled people, which were capable, but suddenly laid off, and so they went and took their value, took their capabilities elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, but those people mostly went to Spanish-speaking countries and the United States.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, in the past year or so, we've seen Venezuela kind of starting to creep into the American news cycle. And there's been a lot of content on Twitter, videos, posts, a little bit of everything showing the unrest, showing gunfights, showing grenade attacks, showing things like that. What has happened in the last year that's really kicked off this current wave of unrest? And then we can, once we go through that, we can talk about what's actually happening now.
Mhm. Well, I wouldn't say it started just in the last year. I think it's been going on. The current wave of unrest has been going on since 2014.
Okay.
That's I guess I would call that the latest iteration, because since Chavez got into power, there have been several iterations of, I guess I would call it, discontent against
Mhm.
Chavez. But this latest iteration is the Maduro, um, the Maduro regime iteration, which is it has been kicked off by the fact that the oil prices that Chavez enjoyed were unsustainable. Back in 2010, they started to decline, and back then, the economy started taking a couple hits. Chavez was, I guess, charismatic enough to hold the fort, but when he passed away, um, he designated, and he really did designate Maduro,
Mhm.
because his last address to the nation, in his last address to the nation, he said that he had chosen Maduro to be his successor, and he told the people in so many words to back him for whatever, right? So he said, "Vote for him, back him. He's the person I've chosen to take over the Bolivarian revolution process." Now, oil prices cannot be sustained forever, and the great difference between Chavez and the previous administrations that I was talking about, the big difference was that Chavez not only made the state more dependent on oil, he crippled the economy through expropriation and through price and currency controls. So he basically, like, you can't, you if you're going to sell something here in Venezuela, you have to be prepared to show. Let's say you're a retailer and you sell, I don't know. Um,
Coats.
Thank you, coats. Yes, it took me a while because people don't.
And we lost him again, I think. We do lose him from time to time. Given the situation in Venezuela, it's probably not unreasonable to expect that this is going to continue to happen. Given that the quality of the internet there is decent, but not perfect. And I think I'm on fiber here. So
Consumer Protection
there we
Agency.
go. And you're
Oh,
back.
sorry.
No,
Okay.
no, no. You dropped out there for a bit. So coats, if you're a retailer and you're selling coats, then what? Because we
Uh-huh.
lost you there.
All right. So if you're selling coats and you have like one customer per month, you have to be able to show, if somebody from a government consumer protection agency or from a police, some member of the police force or the military or from any of the ministries walks into your establishment, you have to be able to show that you bought that coat. You have to show them the invoice for your buying of that coat so that they know what percentage you're earning for the sale of that coat. and it can't exceed, I think the number is 30%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's a
there's flat out some industries that just does not work with.
yeah, that's a flat out price control, right? So it's well, it's not a price control per se. I guess you could call it a profit control. But
Okay, yeah.
think about this for a second. We're experiencing a hyperinflation, right? So if you buy a coat in May and it costs you 10,000, you can sell it for 13,000. Let's say you sell it for 13,000 in June. When you're going to buy it back again in June, you know, it'll cost you 20,000. So you lost 7,000 on the sale.
Well, and moreover, because the value of the coat dropped, you can't sell something for retail when you're just trying to sell it from person to person usually. So you lost the depreciation as well as the fact that the money you use to sell it has also lost value.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you could pile on that consideration as well. The point is, it's unprofitable to sell coats or anything else for that matter. So yeah, commerce has taken a hit. Industry has taken a hit as a result because another thing that the government did recently was they actually this and now this is a price control. They published a list of I think 20 or 30 between 20 and 30 products that are basic need products, basic necessities like a kilo of rice, the price of a kilo of meat, the price of a kilo of chicken. Like these
Mhm.
things are set, right? So since
Regardless of the cost of the person actually selling them, regardless of the cost of the store owner or the retailer, correct?
yes, and regardless of the cost of the producer as well. So nobody's producing these things anymore.
Because they can't afford to feed chickens given that the price that they can sell them at is absolutely fixed. And we lost him again. We'll see if he pops back up here. I do apologize for that, folks.
That it's not magically oil prices drop and then all the other products disappear, right?
Right. Sorry, you'd cut out there again for a second.
What was the last word I said?
I just finished asking the question that basically, if you can't afford to feed chickens, you certainly can't afford to, if chicken feed goes up in cost, you can't afford to really sell the chickens to the meat shop because the meat shop's price is fixed. They're not going to pay you $5 for a chicken they can only sell for $2.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that's the reason you don't find any chicken. Like that's the reason for the scarcity.
Hmm.
It's not because oil prices dropped magically every other product disappeared from the shelves.
Right. It's
That's
because
not
it's because
sorry.
people couldn't afford to sell what they had sold previously because of the fixed nature of the cost, or actually
Right.
of the price, and the cost fluctuated, but the price did not.
Right. And so whatever chicken there was before had been imported by the government. And now they can't afford to import it. But they still won't open up the market to work on its own and for people to produce it on their own. They still won't release them to sell at a price that makes sense. And so what you get is a bunch of black market chickens that have no quality control and people get sick.
Mhm.
And sometimes the government is the one who's doing the selling in the black market.
Oh gosh. So they're
Like
they're
not
tapping into the
not
free
sorry.
market they can forbid.
Yeah, but hold on. Let me just make just clear something up. It's not the government selling in the black market. It's people in who are connected to the government who get access to imported chicken with government funds, and then on the side they sell in the black market.
Okay, so it's corrupt. It's basically corruption at that point.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Very much so. Was there an election this last spring? If I recall correctly, there was. And what happened there? Why is Maduro, in the face of all this economic downturn and hardship, it's obviously easy to see that he's not popular because they're blaming him for it. But what has happened in that last election and since that last election that has led to what appears to be a very direct challenge to his power?
Okay, so the political situation, we just talked a little bit about the economics. So the political situation is very, you could call it delicate. Uh, I would say that people are fighting. People are fighting to take back control of government because all the institutions are controlled by Chavez appointments. Like he had there was a time when they had full control of the National Assembly. And when they had majority National Assembly, they designated a bunch of people to different um, parts of the government. Like we have our electoral power, that the elections are controlled by a government agency called the National Electoral Council, Consejo Nacional Electoral. And the National Electoral Council is presided over by people who are militant members of the government party, basically.
Okay.
Basically. The Tibisay Lucena is the lady who's in front, and since she's been there, it's. I think there was only one electoral process that Chavez lost in the entire since she's been at the head of the National Electoral Council, and there have been many. There's been evidence of abuses in terms of political propaganda using state funds, the national voting registry being inflated, people having 2 or 3 different national ID numbers that they used to vote. It's been a mess. But aside from that fact, the thing that has led to what happened this time around, like I guess on the 23rd of January, which was Guaido being sworn in as the president, is that during 2017, in I think August 2017, the president convened a parallel National Assembly called the Constituent Assembly by him. And that whole process was unconstitutionally done. It was done out of the constitutional norm.
Would this be similar to us setting up a second Congress?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's exactly that's exactly the way to look at it. Now, that second Congress, that Constituent Assembly, last year in 2018, they were the ones who called for the election to happen early in May. They were the ones who avowed the election, the next presidential election, the one that took place on the 20th of May. And they were the ones who started, I guess, what would you call it, swearing in the people who ran for office. Yeah. So they started this entire parallel thing because they lost the National Assembly in 2015 by a landslide, and they weren't expecting it because they thought they basically, what's it called in English? Gerrymandered. So they gerrymandered all the different districts in the country, and they thought that they were going to win by a landslide again because they did before. And somehow they're enough of a minority that not even that worked.
When you're cheating and you can't win, it's bad.
Yeah. So so they lost the entire National Assembly. Well, no, not the entire. They lost almost 2/3. They lost more than 2/3, but then right before the National Assembly was
we lost him again. Socialism doesn't work, folks. And if you need any proof of that, I would say that Jaime's internet connection is certainly evidence of it. Hang in there. He will be back. He's usually back in about 45 seconds, 60 seconds, something like that. Fortunately, there you are. You came back again. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was saying that before they transferred the National Assembly in December 2015, they held an extraordinary session on the last days of December, and they packed the Supreme Court. They
Okay.
increased the number of justices in the Supreme Court so that they could pack them. And well, coincidentally, when power was transferred to the new assembly, we would have had the 2/3 majority, but we couldn't really make use of it because the Supreme Court invalidated the results in 2 of the states.
Okay.
So that was, hold on, give me a second.
Of course. And folks, just to bring you up to speed here, we are talking with Jaime Castillas in Caracas in Venezuela about the current economic situation there, about the current political situation there. You've seen, of course, the news reports of unrest and all that good stuff. So that's what we're talking about. That's who we're talking with. We have the internet drop out occasionally, but hang in there with us because I definitely think this stream is worth tuning into. We're sticking around through the technical glitches.
All right, I'm back.
And he's back. All right.
All right. So they packed the Supreme Court. So basically, they created a parallel government. Basically, they started creating their own parallel government back then. And that's
this is, just for clarification, this is Maduro's party creating this parallel government because they were losing the primary government in the elections. Is that a fair assessment? Okay.
Yeah, they lost the National Assembly in the elections. But basically, that's in 2015 they lost control of the National Assembly. They still have control of at that time they still have control of the executive power, and they managed to, stake a foothold in the Supreme Court. And they've always had the electoral power. Now, since that took place in 2015, things have begun to, they began to turn for the worse economically, and people started getting more upset. The opposition had tried, they've been trying to hold dialogues with the government for this span of 3 years, trying to get the government to release the political prisoners and to ease up on the economic policy so that we can, so that the country can start generating resources and kickstart the economy again to stop the scarcity and the inflation and the famine.
Mm-hmm.
The government has not yielded. There were a series of dialogues held in Santo Domingo, and the government said that it was going to release a bunch of people that they had taken, prisoner from the protests, because what they do is they round up people after the protest, after the large march, the large marches end. They just start attacking the stragglers and either shooting them or taking them to jail, and the stragglers start fighting back. And so, yeah, chaos ensues usually. And back then, I think that there were over 1,000 people who have been jailed and tried, and some of them are still being held. I think there's over, about 100 or 200. I don't remember the exact number right now of political prisoners, officially recognized as political prisoners. And the government has not been forthcoming in the promises it has made so far. So people were very upset, even with the opposition. It's like they felt abandoned by the parties who were supposed to be representing them, and they've lost faith in the government's ability to keep their promises, any promises made in any dialogue that could be had with them. So there's this, packed Supreme Court. The packed Supreme Court says that it's completely legal for Maduro to create this national constituent assembly, this parallel assembly. The parallel assembly calls for elections. The elections are not recognized at the time, like in May 2018, last year. Many of
And we lost him again. Folks, just for those of you tuning in, we are chatting with Jaime Castillas in Caracas. His internet is Venezuelan, and being that it's Venezuelan and socialist, it does cut out. He should be back in about 40 seconds, 30 seconds. So don't go anywhere. It's worth sticking around for, I promise. We'll get him back. He'll suddenly pop back in here. Let's see if I can make it happen in 3, 2, 1. No. I tried. Give him just a second. The internet does cut in and out. but we are getting some great updates on what's going on in Venezuela from a ground's eye view, an eye level on the street kind of view. I'm reasonably sure it's his internet. Let's just put it that way. I'm not getting any warnings on my end. Let's see. I just got a message from him. Says I dropped out, and I'm saying you dropped out as well. Can all of you out in the chat hear me okay, or can you hear me, or can you hear Jaime okay? Jaime, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. You can still hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
Are we back?
We are back. We are back. Your internet's dropping out. Lexi's in the chat says that the internet is glitching on your end, not on mine. So I'm not going anywhere, and all that good stuff. So you were saying there is basically a second Congress. The Supreme Court's been stacked. There were elections this last year, less than a year ago, in May of 2018. Maduro's party lost, essentially, and so they've been creating a second government to basically retain power, because the government that they're in right now is not actually winning any elections.
That is correct. Although technically Maduro didn't lose the election in May. He won the election in May. The election in May was a sham election. It was called on by an unconstitutional power, like an unconstitutional assembly that he created out of whole cloth. The main opposition parties were disabled from participating. That's another thing that's important.
Mm-hmm.
They were just simply disqualified from participating. It's easy to win when you don't have it, when you're not running against anyone. At least
Yes,
not a. Yeah, he ran against a couple people who are suspected, closet supporters, because there has to be someone, right? Because people have to see someone running. But these people who ran against him, they're with him. And can you hear me?
I can. Okay. I can. So basically, even his opposition was in his own pocket.
Yeah. Basically. And these people were not. They don't have any popular support, and they never did. And they weren't the people who were going to really make a dent. It's like say Trump runs again, and the DNC picks a person in the primaries, and they say, "Oops, no, the DNC can't participate." But you know what? You can take Jill Stein,
right? Or if they could say something like, "Here's Jared Kushner," and it's like,
"Oh,
well, that's not much opposition at all."
Yeah. It would have to be somebody who's actually in the same boat as Trump. You're right. So, but with no popular support. So yeah, no, not even Jared Kushner. That would be like too overt. But somebody who's suspected of leaning towards, Trump. Yeah. So it's like, let me see.
Well, the entire election is rigged. So if it's not certified as a non-corrupt election, basically, it's not a fair contest. And it's a little bit hard to say that the will of the people won, or it's really hard to say that there's any legitimacy to the election when it's rigged from the word go.
Right. Plus, that is absolutely correct. But even despite that, it was a de facto election, just called on by an illegal, parallel power, I guess. And he wins, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's supposed to be sworn in on the 10th of January. by the National Assembly, the actual National Assembly, the one elected by the people in 2015. He
So
does.
so the fake government holds an election and then expects the real government to basically ratify it.
Yeah, because that's what the Constitution says.
Right.
So they want to, they kind of want to, they want to, they always say that they do everything inside the Constitution except when they don't need to or they don't want to. So they want to give, a veneer of legitimacy by having the National Assembly swear them in, and there are people in the National Assembly who are actually willing to do so. Surprisingly enough, because well, there are a few members of their party in the National Assembly. They hold about a third of it, and there's another group of people who are, I guess, profiting from the current status quo, who
Mm.
were also willing to extend the status quo or to seek a different means of transition. And I guess, well, things get complicated. There's an entire case involving a man of apellido of his last name is Gorrin.
Gorin. Okay.
Gorrin, yes, and he's the owner of Globovisión, which used to be a hard anti-government channel, and he bought it, and then it suddenly became bland. Um, and he's being investigated for having embezzled $1 billion of public funds, and then using that, like having received that as bribes from the government, and then using that to finance opposition members of the opposition party. I
That just sounds about as dirty as it gets politically.
Yeah. And when I said $1 billion, that wasn't an exaggeration or I guess a rhetorical flourish of hyperbole. $1,000 million. This man has $1,000 million of public funds in his private bank accounts.
While the rest of you are struggling to buy eggs and you can't even buy simple meat such as chicken.
That's right. That's right.
That
I haven't
doesn't-
seen a chicken in about 6 months.
Oh my gosh. And here, of course, here at McDonald's, you can buy a chicken sandwich for about $1.25.
It's insane.
It is insane. Now, the current iteration of the uprising, because it sounds like the uprising is it's just a serial saga that goes back decades even.
Yes.
The current iteration of the uprising is basically in response to the legal government refusing to ratify the last election or the threat that they might ratify it.
That's a very good question. At first, people were afraid that there was a threat that they might ratify it. But then the legal government decided that they were not going to swear Maduro in. So Maduro ended up swearing in to the packed Supreme Court. He wanted to swear in to the Constituent Assembly, to the parallel Constituent Assembly, but I think he decided against it because the reason the elections were called into question was because the Constituent Assembly had called them, had actually had them held. So he probably thought it wouldn't be a good idea to have the same questionable body swear him in. So yeah, so he swore into the packed Supreme Court instead of the National Assembly, like the Constitution says he should. And the Constitution provides for, there's this article, that Article 233 of the Constitution says that if there is an absolute absence of the president, before taking oath, that the president of the National Assembly becomes the temporary president, and that he's to call for elections within, the next 30 days. That's basically what happened. Now, some people are calling it a coup, particularly people who have no idea what our laws say, and they just have this ideological, pixelated view of the world. Bernie Sanders, I'm looking at you. I mean, you should be better informed, man. You're a statesman, okay?
Absolutely. And
I'm also
Representative Omar from Minnesota.
Illinois, yeah, and I guess Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Please don't. I don't like talking about her. I really don't.
We just call her Red Occasional Cortex for short.
That's fine. That's fine. We make fun of Maduro too.
She's they're not sending our best, I believe is how the phrase goes. In the current uprising and in the current trends that I've seen on Twitter and the current I want to say like the noise, and I say that in a good way, like the current chatter that is coming out of Venezuela. There is a guy, and I'm going to try to pronounce his name correctly, and you're going to correct me in a second. Guaido, Guiado,
Guaido.
Guaido,
Hmm.
and he is basically attempting to establish some legal order to what is happening in Venezuela right now. And he's attempting to do it as, if I understand this correctly, an interim president who is trying to hold and advocate to hold legitimate elections. He's not trying to name himself president for life. He's just saying we need an actual legal election that is not rigged. Is that a pretty good understanding of it?
That is absolutely correct. Yes, that is absolutely correct. So Guaido, who is a member of Voluntad Popular, which is a member of the International Socialist. He's not a far right figure, for the love of God. He's decided, like, he was the at that moment when he swore, into power.
Mhm.
He was the president of the National Assembly, of the legal body that has been recognized by the world and other regional um, members of the Organization of American States, of the regional powers. He's been recognized as the president of the only legal body in Venezuela that has legitimacy. So what he's doing is he's following the letter of the Constitution. His task as interim president right now is to call for legal, transparent elections with the supervision of the international community, with the necessary prerequisites, which is a clean registry of electorates, of electors, I guess, with a body that is designated by the National Assembly, by the people, and not these people the people who run the National Assembly. Their terms lapsed like 4 or 5 years ago. Their terms have lapsed. They haven't been renewed, and they have to be renewed. So
So it's like there's 7 years into a 4-year term.
yeah, something like that. So I don't know. I don't remember the precise number. There's so many things going on, but
Mhm.
their terms did lapse. I think it was 2 years ago that the terms lapsed.
Okay.
And and what he's doing right now, well, the first thing he's doing is Maduro's calling for the countries that have recognized Guaido, the legal president. He's calling for the diplomatic missions in all those countries to be disbanded, and he said he would kick them out of Venezuela. The first thing Guaido did when he got into power was he, said that those missions were to stay put if they so desired. That there was no reason to recognize Maduro. There was no reason to obey that completely insane order.
Mhm.
And many of the people of the Venezuelan embassies in the United States have decided that they're going to continue the mission. So that was the first thing he did. Now, the second thing he seems to be doing is he seems to be diverting funds from the government to back to the because for years now, uh, the United National Socialist Party of Venezuela has enjoyed complete discretionary use of of public funds and of PDVSA and all the payments done to the industry by all its clients, I guess. The British government already decided that they weren't going to pay out $1.2 billion that they owe PDVSA. They're not going to pay them out to the government. I think they owe them to the PDVSA, but they're not going to pay them out to the government. They're going to pay them out at a later time. So these funds are already being they're setting up the structure, the proper functioning structure of the state when it comes to PDVSA and all the I guess you would call it the proper channels for managing
And then there is our Venezuelan hiccup. I think that's just what I'm going to start calling it. The internet does cut out in Caracas from time to time. So once again, we'll just pause for station identification, which is you are listening to the Unfiltered Christian channel. Our guest is Jaime Castillas. He is coming to us live from Caracas. And there we go. Hey, you're back.
Oh, when did I drop out?
About 30 seconds ago. So we paused for station identification. I told everybody what we're up to and who we're chatting with, and carry on.
All right. So Guaido's, he's recovering the proper channels for it, for managing the money, the public money of the state-run oil company. So that's another thing that he's doing, because those funds were being misappropriated and they were using them to hand themselves billion-dollar payouts.
Again, while the average citizen is simply struggling to buy eggs at this point.
Correct.
So Guaido is a socialist, but he is attempting to at least be a legal socialist.
That is correct. He's a socialist who's attempting to be a legal socialist, I guess. Yes, you would say that. Now, I would use this whole Venezuelan, if I were in the United States, I would use this Venezuelan situation as a litmus test, because you can see, like, in any political movement, you are going to have a part of that movement be comprised of people who actually believe what they say, people who are acting in they're acting in their interests. Nobody can forgo their own interests, but they're also doing it responsibly, taking into account the interests of the people they represent, or the people they defend, or the people whose responsibility it is for them to advocate for.
Yes.
And that would be in any movement, in the right, in the left, the nationalists, the internationalists, I don't know, the populists or the elitists, whoever it is. You're going to have people who are responsible and people who are just insanely power hungry and downright criminal. And what we're seeing in Venezuela is a clash between I wouldn't even call it moderate part of the left. I would call it the responsible part of the left.
The legal left.
Yes. The legal and responsible part of the left against the irresponsible, destructive part of the left. Now, I would use this as a litmus test to see who in the American left is backing.
Yeah, we lost him again there. Venezuelan internet hiccup number 5, I think. And again, we're just waiting for his internet to come back in. It usually comes back in within about a minute or so.
Money for the last
there we go
4 years. Can you hear me?
I can now. You cut out there. You were saying basically it's a litmus test to see who on the American left is siding with basically which side of the Venezuelan left, or the illegal side or the legal side, the irresponsible side or the trying to be responsible side of the Venezuelan left. And I think it's interesting because we've talked about this a little bit previously, is that there is no right. There is very little center right or center anything there. It's mostly just left, and American leftist politicians are talking as if this is a massive right-wing takeover that's being funded by Trump as a coup.
Yeah, that to me, that's insane. It just speaks to a level of misinformation that I don't think I've ever seen in before, ever. Or maybe it's because there weren't enough informed people to realize that we were all misinformed, so we were all misinformed together. I don't know what it is. But I've never seen such, I did experience it in 2002. And in some visits I've gone to the United States and I visited, and I did it. I got glimpses of it through connections with people over there. Like I would have people I met over there, and I would tell them, yeah, no, Chavez is just destroying our our economy. He's just expropriating everything, and he's making it impossible for commerce to survive, and he's driving small merchants out of business and expropriating big merchants. And I would get, back in 2000.
Yeah, we lost him again. Right as it's getting good. It's always the case. That is always the case. So one thing that Jaime has told me while we wait for him to come back is that I believe we'll clarify this, the minimum wage in oh, there you are.
Sorry.
You'd cut out again. It seems like we're getting a few more bumps in the internet road.
Well,
and then we lost him again. One of the things I'd like to clarify, though, with Jaime is that right now in Venezuela, the minimum wage, I believe, is either $6 a week or $6 a month. And that's the American equivalent. That's not a lot of money. And one thing he told me the other day is that at the time, there you are.
Okay.
Right. We were just talking about the minimum wage there while you were out, but carry on. Sorry about that. Could you clarify the minimum wage there? Is it $6 a week or $6 a month? American?
A month. Well, I don't know if you could call it $6 anymore. It changes. The hyperinflation is so fast; it's probably $3 now.
Oh, jeez. And the price of a dozen eggs is how much?
Last time I checked, it was about $3.
So you work somewhere between $1 to $3 to $4 weeks to buy a carton of eggs.
That's correct.
Heaven help us all.
Yeah.
And you've been talking about people in America. We've never met, but the people you have met in America seem to have a bit of out of touch thoughts concerning. They seem to be disconnected from what's going on in Venezuela right now.
Yeah, that is correct, and they've been disconnected from it for a long time. Like back in 2007, I would tell them about this situation down here, and they would say that what was happening was that privileged classes were being ousted by Chavez, and they were losing their privileges. It turns out they weren't. They were the people losing their privileges was every single Venezuelan. Mm-hmm. Was losing their capacity, their purchasing capacity was down in the ground, crumbling, and small businesses and small business owners were driven out of business. People took to informal commerce in order to survive.
The black market.
Yeah. It's basically it's funny because whenever you mention the black market to somebody from the United States, they picture a bunch of Russian guys getting together and putting two vans against the trunks against each other and exchanging a satchel of money for a satchel of goods.
Right.
The black market is simply people just continuing doing what they're doing, except they just don't bother with the
legal side.
Yeah, they just don't bother to report any of the things that they sell or anything like that, because that's the only way to survive, not make a profit.
Right. And we're not talking about like buying lots of luxury goods like tequila or fine silk or anything like that. We're talking about buying vegetables, meat, cheese, eggs, like just filling your refrigerator becomes a black market proposition. That
is correct. We're talking about a bunch of guys wearing jeans and t-shirts coming in from the farming states, from the from the farmland, I guess, into the capital with a couple of trucks, with 2 or 3 trucks, setting up a shade, like 4 posts and a shade, a couple of planks of wood on top of a metal, on top of metal legs, I guess. And putting baskets on top of that, and then exhibiting their wares, and their wares are like fruit, vegetables, rice, chicken, things sold in unmarked bags, like nuts, which are which are, by the way, unbuyable right now. They're very expensive.
What can you get, and what can you buy? If you go to the store right now, what can you buy? What is available for the average person to buy?
Well, it's very difficult to know what's going to be available. Sometimes some things are available somewhere, and sometimes they're not. They also come in cycles. Like, for instance, right now, oil isn't available. You can't buy vegetable oil because
Mhm,
it hasn't been out in the market for the longest time. Um, Butter has disappeared as well, but sometimes it comes, sometimes it goes. There's no milk right
mhm,
now. Um, Things that are more regularly replenished are lean foods and veggies and natural foods.
mhm.
You can also find some processed foods. There's nothing imported, almost nothing imported anymore. You can find some processed foods, but they're really, really, really expensive. Um,
Give me an example of processed foods and the expense.
right. So, cookies,
Mhm.
crackers, like saltines. You can get saltines or Oreos. Sometimes they pop up. Um,
And how much are they? If you see a package of Oreos, how much are they?
they would cost about 4 times what the eggs cost. So that's 4 monthly minimum wages.
That's like 8 or 10 or $12 for a package of Oreos. And when we say a package of Oreos, do we mean the 3 columns of cookies, or do we mean just 1 column of cookies
That would be the package that has 2 columns of 12 cookies, so 24 cookies.
for $12?
Yeah.
That is, and Oreos aren't necessarily the cheapest thing on the shelves here in America, but that is insane.
Yeah.
That is utterly insane. And the great socialist promise that is always made, that is always used as justification for this, is that there will finally be equality, that we will get rid of inequality, that everybody will just be on the same level. And the joke on the American right, of course, is that everyone under socialism is equal, they're equally miserable. But it sounds like, despite everything, despite the decades of socialism in Venezuela, despite all the efforts of the government there, it sounds like there is actually still inequality, that there are people that can buy Oreos and those that cannot. Is that the case? Ah, we lost him. We lost him. Folks, it is just unfathomable to me to pay a month's wages for a package of Oreos. Um, Much less to pay several months' wages for a package of Oreos. That is just insane. Um,
I'm back.
and you're back. I was just about to tell you, I'm waiting for you. Um, what was the last thing you heard me say?
The premise of socialism was that there would be equality.
Yes, and it seems like that promise, even though the Venezuelan government has had decades to deliver on it. The joke in America on the American right is that socialists are all equal in socialist countries. They're all equally miserable. But it sounds like there is still inequality, that there are people that can afford Oreos and luxury goods and those that cannot. Is that true?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, inequality here has. If you take the person with the most money in Venezuela and the person with the least money, I'm sure you're going to get and you divide the amounts, like you divide their personal fortunes, you're going to get a larger multiple than any you're going to get in the United States, because the richest person in Venezuela is richer than the average billionaire in the United States. I'm talking about. See, let's see. I think so. These things happen in a very weird way. It's how we find out about these things. It's basically Twitter.
Mhm.
One of the daughters of the president, and it's one of three, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the three daughters of President Chavez bought something somewhere. I think the invoice was like $4, right? The receipt was $4. It was one of these, or she withdrew something. It was like she withdrew a minimal amount from the bank.
Mhm.
That's what it was. And I think she discarded the receipt from the transaction.
Mhm.
somebody fished it out of the somebody knew it was her, and they fished it out of the trash or wherever it is that she discarded it, and they snapped a picture of it and put it up on Twitter.
Ooh,
Her account has 4 point something, $4.6 billion.
$1 billion US. This is not your currency in billions. This is our currency in billions.
Yes. Yes. $1 billion US.
She's richer than the Kardashians in a sense.
Yeah. 4.5 billion. That's just one daughter, and that's just one account.
In other words, the inequality in Venezuela, despite decades of socialism, the inequality in Venezuela is greater than it is in America, where we have not been trying to necessarily get rid of inequality. We've just been doing more or less, and it seems like some days less, of a free market approach to the economics of the country.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say that if you take the it depends on how you measure inequality, but if you take it as the richest person's fortune divided by the poorest person's fortune in both countries, you're going to get a larger number here.
Okay. By a long shot, it sounds like, by an absolutely staggering amount. 'Cause I don't there are people in America that eat out of the trash, and, uh, the most of the homeless people that I've seen, begging on the streets in America are dressed fairly well, and they eat fairly well, and some of them, I have seen have cell phones and laptops, um, which sounds like unimaginable wealth for our quote unquote homeless, compared to the people in your country who are literally just eating whatever they can get their hands on, if I understand this correctly.
Yeah, well, our home a truly homeless person in our country, what they usually do is they just go somewhere in the wilderness. They pick a small stream. They set up a mud hut beside the stream. They, they put a fence around, like a 4 by 4. No, maybe a little bit larger, like a 12 by 12 feet bit of land, and they raise a couple of animals and a couple of vegetable plants in the wilderness, and they live in the mud hut, and they don't have any running.
And we're losing him again. We'll wait here for a moment. Seems like there are more bumps in the internet there. I believe Venezuela is east of New York, so I think they're +1 off of New York time, which right now should be about 2:15 p.m. in Venezuela. Early afternoon, early mid-afternoon. The amount of poverty there is just staggering. It is unconscionable, the levels of poverty that we have seen so far on Twitter and a little bit on the news, but not a lot. I don't feel like, and this is one reason that talking with somebody who's actually there, um, I think, is so important. Jaime, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. It's dinging at me when you rejoin our group chat, so I can kind of see that you're bouncing in and out as necessary. But you were talking about the people that just live in the wilderness. They don't have any money. Are
No,
they as hungry as the others, just kind of off doing their own homesteading thing, or are they actually making a better life than they can have in the city?
no,
They're not
no,
better off.
no. These people are emaciated,
Okay.
missing most of their teeth,
Hmm.
prematurely old. They succumb to any illness that they might have because where are they going to get anything?
Right.
Any medicine? No, these people are living. It's a mud. They're mud huts. They're not really homesteading. It's a mud hut with 3 chickens and a pig,
Mhm.
and that's it. It's pre-medieval levels of misery.
Mm, mhm. Okay. And obviously, this level of hunger and poverty has made people desperate, and we have seen that. We've seen video of gunfire in the streets there in Caracas, um, attacks, all of that. This is all playing into the desperation of the people and the hope that restoring the legal system will somehow fix this, at least temporarily. Correct?
Yeah, yeah. Well, The videos you've been seeing with the gunfire are actually a very, I guess you could call it a poetically just, like a tragic, ironic situation. Uh,
How
and
so?
well, because Chavez passed a law prohibiting every form of gun ownership, like almost every form of private citizen gun ownership.
Hmm.
And then he started distributing guns that he bought from Russia to his people in the barrios, in those popular sectors.
And a barrio is like a favela, correct?
Yeah, like a ghetto, like a favela. That's right. And so he started distributing guns to defend the revolution, and he would always say, as far back as 2002, he would say, "Our revolution is a peaceful revolution, but it's armed." And
And go ahead. And we lost him again. It is note that he and I have spoken about this before. Guns are illegal in Venezuela. If you watch the YouTube videos, what you will hear is semi-automatic and automatic gunfire, which is um, indicative of the fact that they're using military style weapons in a place where weapons are illegal, in a place with almost complete gun control. Um, so that is a commentary in and of itself. That is a interesting point in and of itself, that the gun control doesn't seem to work if we're hearing automatic gunfire in the streets of Caracas and in other places around the country. And I believe he's back. You back?
yep.
This little indicator thing's doing good. So you were saying it's a tragic irony that it's an armed revolution, but a peaceful one, but it's still armed.
Yeah, but the ironic thing is, so he basically made it so that every single delinquent in the country managed to get their hands on guns, while law-abiding citizens didn't. You've heard this argument before. It's actually true.
And when you outlaw guns, only outlaws have guns.
Yeah, and but what happened is Maduro is so unpopular. I mean, the money ran out, so he's become so unpopular that some of those people have turned against him, and now they're the biggest threat to his government. So Maduro's police forces have been cracking down uh, the hardest in the popular sectors, the people who were their main line of support before. Like, but really with no mercy at all. It's horrible, the things that are happening to those people.
They are being rounded up and taken somewhere, as I
Yes.
understand it.
Yeah, but nobody knows where. Like the middle class, the lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class, and some of the rich people, they usually get rounded up or taken into made into political prisoners, or have their passports taken away from them, and they usually do that when they get either when they get into politics, or when they are stragglers in one of the big thousands of people's marches that you see on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
uh it it's very seldom that they get torn out of their beds and put in the back of a flatbed truck with a gun to the back of their neck.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening right now to the people who are shooting back at the repressive police forces in the popular sectors. Like, they're being dragged out of their house, and nobody knows where they're being taken.
So it's very much a Politburo, a KGB, a Gestapo style crackdown. There's not any hyperbole in making that comparison. And we lost him again. We lost him again to the Maduro internet, as Lexi is calling it. Hey, Timmy, good to see you. Welcome, welcome. Once again, folks, we are live with Jaime Castillas from Caracas, Venezuela, talking about the situation there. The internet is cutting in and out. Seems like it is coming in waves. It'll be good for a while. It'll be kind of sketch for a while. There have been crackdowns on the civilian populace. I've seen some fairly graphic photos and video on Twitter. Gunfire in the streets. Definitely not a good situation, and definitely an authoritarian situation. where people don't seem to have any rights. They are being dragged out of their beds in the middle of the night, and they are being taken somewhere. We don't know where. I need to ask Jaime if that's actually indicative of them being killed or if them just being imprisoned. We will definitely ask him when we get back. So far, we've been talking about the economy. Right now, it seems like the average Venezuelan is making between $3 and $6 a month. Eggs are somewhere between $2 and $3. This is in American dollars. This is not in Venezuelan dollars, but in American dollars. Very poor country right now, due to price fixing, due to really the natural progression and the natural consequence of the socialism that the country has had for the better part of at least 2 decades, maybe longer. And of course, this all has been made worse by the illegal actions of the current government, which has kind of created a second Congress or a second form of government that they control more directly. And it's an unelected form of government. It's an unelected governmental power, because the elections have not gone well for the current group that is in power. So, in the meantime, the government is trying to set up a second sort of authority that allows them to do what they like, to control what they like, and to see. Just got a message from him. We'll say, "Yep, waiting for you, bud." Smiley face. It is. It's exactly what it is, Lex. It's a shadow government. It's a second government, and it's one that's not accountable to the people. And this is extremely dangerous, as well as actually being illegal, according to the Venezuelan constitution. What they are doing right now is basically trying to set up a government that cannot be subject to elections. It seems as if there are parts of the current government that are not acting in a way that is legal according to the elections. And okay, awesome. He's going to use this opportunity for a bio break. I, on the other hand, have had a lot of liquid today. But yes, it's definitely a situation where they're trying to not be accountable to the people. They are trying to stay in power outside of the will of the people, and control the situation as they see fit. This is what makes it a little bit silly when American leftists are saying this is a coup. This is not a coup. This is an attempt by socialists, more legal socialists in Venezuela, to regain some control, to regain some legality and some semblance of order, because right now there is not a lot of order. And you can see this if you just surf Twitter for the Venezuelan trends. You'll see that it's not very orderly at all. But instead, what is happening is that there is a group of socialists who are leftist, and they are at least trying to do something legally. And for that, we can give them credit. It's still, of course, deeply problematic that they are leftist, that they are socialist, and that there is no balance in Venezuela as far as the political parties are concerned. They are just chatting with him here. They are pretty much just a leftist country. There's very few centrists, center right, almost no one on the far right. There's no such thing as a libertarian right now in Venezuela, from the looks of it, which is a rather interesting thought, because here we're used to the idea of balance. We're used to the idea of two parties. They're fighting each other. There's a couple of wingnuts on both sides. There are some rather external parties like the Libertarian Party, the American Socialist Party, Antifa. We have these different movements, the alt-right, that are more fringe, and then there's kind of the more main left, main right. And in Venezuela, this is not the case. So hopefully he is going to rejoin us very, very soon. I'm trying to not have too many tabs open on my browser, or else I would probably be bringing up some of the things I've seen on Twitter so far, and checking in on that. I want to make sure that we are not overloading my bandwidth. And I believe, Jaime, have you rejoined us?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. So I was just recapping for everybody about expenses, about shadow governments, as Lexi put it, all that good stuff. I forget where we were.
We were in the government cracking down on the poorest sectors of society.
Yes, and to say that that is like a Politburo slash KGB slash Gestapo style crackdown, is that hyperbole? Is that me just throwing the Nazi label around, or is that actually what it's like?
Hmm. Well, it's hard to say. I would say it's a Cuban style crackdown.
Okay.
They're just as you know as soulless and implacable and despotic, I would say, but they're more Latin Americanized. So what they do is, so see, they're every street, every barrio, every community has
Mhm.
a community leader. The community leader is the person who's in charge of receiving and distributing the claps, which are the boxes of food that the government gives to the people for free.
Mhm.
So those community leaders, part of their obligations is also to inform the government when somebody is stepping out of line.
Mhm.
So they are being what they're doing is they're calling in they're calling the government or tweeting to the representative in the government, and the government is calling in the security forces or the intelligence agencies to come and drag away the people who are getting, I guess,
Out of
uppity.
line.
Yeah, out
Yeah.
of line.
So they're tweeting names to the government.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're
Not
using Twitter to
I don't know if it's Twitter or WhatsApp. I think they use
okay.
private means. They use private means.
Okay. And
Mhm.
so the basically the snitches and the people that control the food sound like the same person. Are they doing their jobs well of distributing that food, or is there some, skimming off the top?
Well, I'm sure they're skimming off the top. I can't say for certain. That's something I wouldn't know, to be honest. And there's probably a bit of everything because there are so many of these community leaders all over the place. Each one must have his own, modus operandi.
Mhm.
But what they say, when you centralize resources and you give them away for free, you're going to get corruption.
Absolutely.
So it's a possibility. Yeah.
Absolutely. And with these current style crackdowns, what is this ramping up the tension? Is this diffusing tension? And really what's happening in terms of like the last week and what happens next?
Well, the tensions I would say are increasing because of the crackdown.
Okay.
Uh, the Maduro government is trying different strategies to hold on to the shreds of legitimacy that they still have left, and they're trying to they're testing out the different strategies that they've used before to see if something sticks. Mm, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they usually try it. We call it el libreto, the script. They're going to try for crackdowns. They're going to try to intimidate people. That sometimes that works. Sometimes people get scared and they stay home. That hasn't been working for the last 3 years. Next, they are probably going to start uh, trying to bribe the opposition leaders, which also has worked in the past. Next, they're going to try and um, jail them or exile them or put pressure on them, scare them into silence, which seems like it's not working because this time the international community has come strongly out in
Mhm.
support and very strongly. And it's not the United States coup. No, it's the international community. We're talking about Canada. We're
Mhm.
talking about Colombia,
Mhm.
Panama, Costa Rica. We're talking about Brazil. We're talking about Argentina, Paraguay. We're talking about Chile. We're talking about
A number of nations in the EU, if I remember correctly. Yes.
yeah, well, Italy has come out strongly in
Mm.
support. The EU has been a little bit more cautious. I think they've decided that they're going to wait 8 days for Maduro to call elections, fair and free elections. That could provide Maduro with an escape route if he manages to convince everyone that the elections are fair and free, and he manages to do a sham election again.
Mhm.
That could be a possibility. That's one that. But I don't think. I think that the EU is not going to let it slide that the elections are not, an unsupervised electoral process with the same, government authorities that that supervised it before, without any international supervision. They're not going to let that slide.
Right. And of course, the United States coming out very strongly in favor of this, I guess you would call it interim government and the powers that be. I know you've mentioned that Guaido and his current situation might allow him to put people in power in Venezuelan embassies abroad, from exiles, from expats, and then make deals with the West for foreign aid, which gives him quite a bit of leverage from the sounds of it, especially if he is hailed as the guy who restored law and order and brought food in from the West. That gives him an edge, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it does. It certainly gives him a very important card to play. And the fact that financial institutions around the world are now recognizing the legitimacy of the Guaido government, and that means that they're trying to reestablish the commercial, I guess, channels that they've opened with the state-run oil industry, and that's another source of financing that's also going to open up to him, that they're trying to close down to the Maduro regime.
So they're trying to open up some of the financial leverage that he has from a legal standpoint.
Yes, and of course there's the humanitarian aid as well, and some countries have actually offered to just plain give away several dozens of millions of dollars in aid to help people, because what we have is a humongous humanitarian crisis of, it's massive proportions. I mean, there's people who are living on 500 calories a day, if not less, and there's no medicine. So there's people desperately in need of medicine, children starving, and nobody's doing anything about it. There's a public hospital, a very famous public hospital called Hospital de Clínica Universitario here in Venezuela. And a few days back, some information leaked that the government-appointed directors had prohibited people in that hospital from receiving funds or medicines brought in by NGOs outside, because that was not in keeping with the revolutionary principles, I guess, or something like that.
Jeez.
So they're letting people die for lack of medicines, just to not admit that somebody else is taking over that somebody else is better at providing the medicines that they are.
It would basically to admit the failure of the socialist regime.
Yeah. They won't admit it. They won't. That's quadrupling down, I guess you would call it.
Tim from the chat, aka Sage Croncell, says, "Is the new guy better? I know right now anything is better, but such situations are always open avenues for the morally questionable." So, is Guaido taking advantage of a situation, or is he seemingly got some amount of good faith? It seems like the Venezuelan people have some level of good faith in him.
Yeah, well, I don't want to bog myself down on tiny minutia, but the fact that he called us citizens instead of people, it's like this guy seems to be he speaks like a statesman, okay, which is something that we haven't had a professional statesman in a high position of power for a very long time. He seems to be he has a family, he has a wife, a young daughter, a dog. He seems to be a very, very capable. He has an engineering degree, and he seems to be a very capable politician, very well mannered, and very morally correct. There's no blemish in his record as of yet, and he has been in politics for quite some time now.
So
yeah, and so he seems to be the man for one of the men that were available in the National Assembly for the job. It just so happened that he was the president of the National Assembly at the time that the vacuum of power occurred. But he seems to be on the up and up. As far as I can tell, I it politics, man. Politicians difficult, but 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 what actually makes me think that he's on the up and up is that any corrupt politician would have already taken the bribe, because you can bet good money that is so you can bet the amount
Mhm.
of money that the government offered to the guy, that bribe has already been offered, and apparently it has been declined.
Because it would have already diffused the situation.
Yeah, it would have. Yes, and it's happened before.
Mhm. In terms of politicians, are there similarities that you see to leftist American politicians and your leaders? And do American politicians speak as if they believe the same thing as Venezuelan politicians, particularly the socialist ones? And are the leaders of Venezuela just further along in the socialist process than, say, somebody like, Red Cortex or Bernie Sanders?
Well, it's it's hard to draw a parallel. Bernie Sanders has elements in his speech that very much parallel Chavez's speech.
Hmm.
So Chavez, we all know Chavez was a democratic socialist. He won in fair electoral process. That's how he got into power.
Hmm.
Then he started doing weird things and started consolidating and concentrating economic and political power to his faction of the government. And he started putting, key people in key places. He was very shrewd in that, but his speech was very similar. Like AMLO in Mexico right now, he's been carbon copying Chavez as well, not just in speech, but now that he's in power, in policy as well. And so there are similarities in the speech. I'm looking at some of the proposals from Bernie Sanders, like, I guess free education, you would call it, or at least, government subsidized education, and universal health care, single payer, and these things were all things that we had here in Venezuela before Chavez. So he's also very similar to the previous politicians, and I guess he would mirror them more. Like, he would mirror the 1970s Carlos Andres Perez and those people more, because he actually wears a suit from time to time, and not military fatigues.
Hmm.
So he's like, I would call him Chavez makers,
Okay.
a group of the Chavez makers. He's the person who creates the policies that could, with they have a high likelihood of resulting in the political unrest that brings about a person like Chavez.
Okay. So he is
Ne-
basically the early form of that evolutionary process.
yes, yes, he seems to be. I would. That's one way to conceptualize him in a political map.
Is the danger of that the fact that the right is very resistant to Bernie Sanders and to the American political right, I should say, is very resistant to Sanders, very resistant to that kind of talk from him, from Pelosi, from AOC, and
Oh,
if some of,
AOC. I'm sorry. Just a correction. AOC is not a Chavez maker. AOC is a Chavez.
okay, she is the next iteration,
Yes, she's definitely the next iteration.
and I'm seeing potential danger in the idea that some of these old fools might get their way on some level, and the right has said that's socialism or that's socialist. We don't want that. And if the left here, guys like Bernie and Pelosi, get their way for um, some of these policies, the policies are going to get into power. They're going to start happening, and then nothing is going to happen like what we see in Venezuela, because it's not something that happens overnight. And then does that kind of tend to give a false sense of security that just a little bit of this isn't all that bad, when in reality it's just another step in the evolutionary process?
It depends on how fast it happens, and I guess it depends on, because all political processes are subject to change. They don't have to Things don't have to happen the exact same way. I guess that the most intelligent thing that could be done is to put, if you're going to implement some of those policies, you would have to put an expiration date on them if they don't work.
That's something our government's not terribly good at.
No, I know. So, yeah, I know there are some laws on the books that have been like on there like at the state level since the turn of the 20th century, and about not being able to walk pigs and things like that.
Anti-dwarf tossing legislation, I believe, is, and I'm dead serious. That is the law on the books that is up for discussion right now.
Oh my God.
Dave just texted me before the stream and said, is this seriously an issue? Like, are people still tossing dwarfs? And I was like, well, not that I'm aware of.
Well, go figure. These things, they need to have expiration dates. They do. They
Absolutely.
do.
Absolutely. Now, has Guaido called for further demonstrations, marches? What's kind of the next step here? What should we be watching for over the next week?
Okay, so Guaido's is calling for open cabildos. A cabildo is a street assembly, like a popular assembly with people in the street.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, when he swore himself in front of the Venezuelan people, to the Venezuelan people,
Mm-hmm.
he did it in an open cabildo where there were hundreds of thousands of people. You saw the images on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
He did it in front of all of the Venezuelan people. We were there to take in his what do you call it, his oath.
Mm-hmm.
So the open cabildo is a figure in our I guess it's a legal figure in our laws that allows for issues to be discussed in the street with the regular people. So he's going to continue doing those. He's going to just meetings where people get to talk, and where he gets to talk, and some of the members of the other political parties in the assembly get to talk, and it's all being done very openly and very, very much in front of the people.
It's like what we would call a town hall meeting.
Yeah, except they're being held in the capital and all over the country, and at the same time, and there's hundreds of thousands of people. And he's going to continue doing those, and at the same time, he's going to continue doing what he needs to do to, protect the diplomatic missions in Venezuela and abroad. Yeah, and to recover the funds, the misappropriated funds of the nation, and to call for the holding of free and fair elections under the proper authorities, under properly elected authorities, with international supervision, and with a clean, I hope, with a clean electoral registry, and with a fair and open process. That's the line. That's the next steps that he's published so far.
Okay. And should we see that there is more? Should we expect more demonstrations to kind of manifest here in the next couple of days, the next week?
Oh yeah, definitely. You're going to see a lot of that, because the open cabildos are themselves demonstrations. These are gigantic marches and meetings of people in the hundreds of thousands. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of that.
Somebody in the chat's making allusions to the idea of Maduro being aided in his flight, should that happen, by the Russians.
Oh no, the Russians.
Now, okay. Well, let me ask you this instead. At what point does Maduro decide to flee? And if so, who helps him? Where does he go? Does anybody on the planet like him?
Well, Maduro has a couple of cards up his sleeve, and he has some options open and some very big disadvantages. The Russians are not going to help him. The Russians have decided that the only way they'll help Maduro is to remain in power. So they've eliminated the option of him seeking asylum in Russia, so that he'll fight to the bitter end.
Okay.
So that's the Russian hardline, because Russia is very much interested in recovering some of the money that it lent to Maduro in order to continue financing social programs to get better electoral results and popular support, as Maduro was, losing all of it, and he's basically lost all of it. So for the past 3 years, they've basically been borrowing from Russia and China indiscriminately.
Mm.
These two countries are interested in getting their money back, so they really want Maduro to stay in power.
And they really don't want him to flee because if basically he takes the debt with him, there's no way he can pay it off, and then the country's going to say, "Sorry, that was the last guy. That's not our problem."
Yep, yep. Those debts were incurred under illegal. They were incurred under an illegal. I would call it illegal means. That would
It was basically
They were
loan.
sorry.
It was basically an illegal loan.
Yeah, those are illegal loans incurred by a faction of the government that was not properly, administering the resources of the nation and not with the nation's best interests.
Mhm.
That's how it would be probably framed to the Russians and the Chinese. And what would they do if I mean there are no Venezuelan assets in Russia and China for them to seize, so they already tried going after Citgo, which is the subsidiary of PDVSA that sells gasoline in the United States, and they failed because that's not for them to take.
Mhm.
So
We
they have no way
we
of recovering their money. Sorry?
I said we still have Citgo stations, that's for sure.
Yeah, but they had Russia tried to take that away and from Venezuela. Those are Venezuelan gas stations,
Mm.
and he couldn't. The United States government would not allow for that to happen because those assets belong to the Venezuelan government, the Venezuelan state, not the government at the time.
Lexi asks, do you see a problem in transferring the country to a new political structure? And do you foresee anarchy in a transfer where, Maduro loses control, but at the same time, Guaido also loses control? Is there a point where both kind of lose their grip on what's going on?
No, I don't think they both are going to lose their grip. I think they're both going to try and assert their grip, and one of them is going to come out triumphant in the end. Now, the other card Maduro has up his sleeve, the other resource that he can use is that he has the support of, at least in theory, of the higher echelons of the armed forces.
Mhm.
Now, we have an armed forces of about around 120,000. What do you call them? Soldiers?
Yeah.
Well, but these are soldiers. I get units. That sounds so dehumanizing, but yeah, units. Between all the components of the armed forces, that's the Air Force, the Navy, and the National Guard and the military. And for an army of 100,000, it's surprising to find that there are 1,000 generals. That's an insane number. That's an insane number. That's one per 100. There's a general per 100 troops. That's insane. So all those generals are probably aligned with Maduro because they've all become exceedingly rich. With the regime, with the illegal trade of gold, which has decimated our national parks down south in the state of Guyana.
Mhm.
And in Guyana, there's a national park called, it's a national park where, did you remember the movie Up?
Yes.
You remember the Tepuy, with a giant with a really tall waterfall?
Mhm.
Okay, that's the place I'm talking about.
Okay.
They've basically destroyed the forest. They've destroyed thousands of acres of rainforest there to dig for gold.
And this is the government and the private people as well?
No, this is the government and the military. And there are people of the Ejército Nacional de Liberación, the Colombian guerrilla group, involved in the illegal trade of gold as well. So they've become rich by using that. They've become rich by using by stealing from the state treasury and by using those funds to import food to create businesses, like spurious businesses where they import food and sell it, at a huge markup. And they basically have all the money in the world.
And especially in a country where just a little bit of money goes a long way. I mean, I think of an American paycheck. I think I've got, let me see here. I've got apparently $9 sitting on my desk here, and that just sounds like an astronomical amount of money for your average Venezuelan.
Depends what you're buying. If you're buying Oreos, it's all gone. But
That's
if
true.
you're buying food, like regular food from the government, like if you have access to government regulated food, those $9 will feed you for a month.
That's just insane. That is just insane to me. Um,
Um,
is the is there a drug trade that is also playing into this illicit wealth?
yes, yes, that's another business that the military has become heavily involved in, because you have a corrupt military with part of a corrupt government. They're supposed to be the ones watching out, for that sort of activity. And at first, I suppose it began by taking bribes. Like, yeah, sure, you can run the truck through, just you know, leave some. And then they started, they started like, no, we're confiscating this. We have buyers. So that's probably how it began, and now the military and the even the government itself is heavily involved in the drug trade. There are a couple of nephews, Maduro's and Celia Flores, his wife. They have a couple of nephews who stood trial in New York and got sentenced to 18 years in jail for trafficking an insane amount, a boatload of drugs using diplomatic credentials. So
Narco nephews.
the narco nephews, yes, this is a narco state.
Somebody in the chat asks, "What are the chances a general close to Maduro is thinking that he could be a national hero and take Maduro out? Does Maduro have a reason to be paranoid about those closest to him, or do they realize that pretty much their livelihood and lifeblood hangs on keeping him in power?"
They'll take him out if he decides to leave. If he takes a deal to leave, they'll take him out.
So he's got to be careful, even in how he flees, because Russia's not going to back him. So he very much sounds like he's backed into a corner.
Yeah, I honestly, for all the harm he's caused and all the damage that is done and the people he's killed, I don't envy the guy. I wouldn't want to be in his position because he's in the center. He's in the eye of a storm of a narco state that is ruled over by several different factions, like mafias, who are vying to maintain the status quo, so that they, well, number one, continue to, make money off the trade and of the state resources, and number two, so that they don't have to answer for everything they've done so far. So, yeah, he's not in a good place.
What are the odds that he cuts a deal with Guaido to get basically amnesty?
They're high.
Very high.
Yeah, they're high. I wouldn't say very, very high, but they're high. I mean, if the international community continues to come out in support of Guaido, and Guaido is recognized as the official president of Venezuela, and the armed forces don't recognize, first, they can't move against him, because that would be that's an insanely dangerous move to make right now for them. But if the armed forces continue to back Maduro, then the only way to, I guess, restore the rule of law in Venezuela is going to be to offer them some sort of a deal out, or particularly somebody whoever has control. And at this point, it's not even clear that that's Maduro, but most likely it will be him, because I guess it looks more official to the armed forces. And I'm not really sure that the armed forces are willing to be in a fight against, like, for instance, let's say things came to the worst possible scenario. And there was an invasion, which I don't think it would be a military, U.S. military invasion. I highly doubt it. It's looking less and less like that's going to happen. But it would probably be a coalition army from, the neighboring countries, particularly Colombia and Brazil. But let's say, worst comes to worst. These people, these military who are in support of Maduro, they've never been keen to participate in a fair fight. I don't think they'd fight for him. So if Maduro says that there's no reason to continue this we've lost, and he takes the deal out. They're going to scatter to the four winds, and I guess we're going to have our version of Simon Wiesenthal hunting them down all over the planet.
Well, and it sounds like if the poverty is just as extreme as you say it is, and I believe that it is, those generals are the elite in terms of wealth, and they've been living very high off of the backs of some very poor people who will be probably at some point very angry if they're not already, and they should be very armed and very much have the opportunity to take it out on that many generals.
Well, it's 30 million people who've been starved and abused for 20 years. Well, a little bit less, maybe 15 years. They've been abused and starved and denigrated and lied to and made fun of
Hmm.
and dismissed as fascistic, imperialistic,
Hmm.
uh, by a government who's just mistreated everyone and killed a bunch of people, innocent people. Like, you can already start hearing the mothers on Twitter begging, the government to release their children, their sons from prison, and you can start hearing. Yeah, I'm haunted sometimes by the wailing cries of women who've lost their children to this horror, and I can hear them. It's just it's too much abuse. I don't think people will stand for. Like, you see images of Il Duce, strung up
Hmm.
by his feet and beaten to a pulp, and you say, I understand how that happens.
Hmm.
I
Oh,
understand.
absolutely.
I understand how it happens.
Well, and I was talking with somebody last night, and they said, "Why, why would you get into the drug trade?" Because I was been reading a little bit on Pablo Escobar, and I said, when when you're making $6 a month and you're working a week and a half just to buy a carton of eggs, at that point you just realize you are going to slowly watch the people around you die, especially if you have a family. You're going to watch them starve, and
Yeah.
they're going to watch you starve. And at some point, you just go, you know what? I don't care anymore. I don't care who I have to kill. I don't care what I have to sell, but I'm not going to sacrifice my family um, in order to avoid that kind of behavior. And especially when you look at the wealth of some of these people, which is fantastic wealth by American standards, and then you place that wealth in a country that is as poor, the differences are even more stark. For instance, when I was driving around in the West Bank, I saw examples of extreme Palestinian wealth and extreme Palestinian poverty, because it's a very similar situation where the
Mhm.
elites hold the money, and you will see some truck that is literally held together with baling wire, and then 30 seconds later on the same road, the same Palestinian style license plate is affixed to a late model BMW M5. That's a nice car by American standards. And somehow it's out in the middle of the West Bank. And you think there's money here, but there are differences between those who have and those who have not. And, that disparity, I think, definitely is something that would drive people to be angry. Not just that you have more, but that there's starving to death. And then there is, like you said, a bank account of 4 point something billion dollars US, and a complete disconnect between the two.
Yep. And there's, social media helps as well. About a year ago, we caught a video of there's a very very there's a road, the main road that goes from the airport to the capital. It's just one road. They're
Hmm.
like just one. So there's people on it all the time. And we just saw this, tweeted video of a line of like a beeline of uh, 200 and $300,000 sports cars like Ferraris and things like that, just making their way from the airport from the port to the capital.
Jeez.
And it's like, why, where did these cars come from? Why are there like 5 or 6 of them
Hmm.
all together being driven to the capital? Whose are these cars?
Hmm.
Who brought in these cars? It's certainly not a businessman. Businessmen don't buy, like, businessmen here buy Yeah, they might buy a BMW. They usually buy, you know, what businessmen now are buying here are usually uh, Jeep Cherokees and those big trucks, those big
Mhm,
SUVs, because
mhm,
they're better for, to get armor plating.
mhm.
That's what they're buying because businessmen are suffering kidnappings and security risks, you would call them, I guess.
Absolutely, and we talked about that here, last week, in private DMs and private chat, that kidnapping has become such a lucrative business there, just to grab somebody and then tell their family to pay up,
Mhm.
or else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why after 6, 7 o'clock at night, there's no one in the street. Like, it's a de facto curfew.
Hmm.
People don't go out. People don't go out because they're scared of being kidnapped or killed for fun. Killed for fun. There's people who kill for fun or for initiations, for gang initiations.
How many gangs are there in Caracas, roughly?
Oh,
Are there just hundreds, thousands, dozens, and are they allianced under larger banners or groups?
that's a very complicated question that I wouldn't know how to begin to answer.
Okay.
Um,
We could say there's a ton of gang activity for starters.
yes, there's a massive amount of gang activity. Just nearby the other day, 5 people were shot dead by the police because they belonged to a gang that had been murdering, kidnapping, and mugging people around the area where I live. And they started terrorizing a school because their
Mhm.
hideout was close to it, was nearby. Jesus, when you're terrorizing school children, come on. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a guy that's a gang of 5 people. Now, the thing is, it's difficult to tell how many gangs there are because those 5 people might have committed crimes all over the place, and they might have been responsible for 1,000 different muggings and dozens of different kidnappings.
Mhm.
So it's very difficult to get a hold of the number of gangs that there are, but they are rampant and they dominate, the streets. That people are just very, very scared to go anywhere and do anything. Like, you'll have a ways back, I used to work in a place that was right in front of a street light.
Hmm.
We're talking about
Well, the internet hung in there for actually quite a bit before it dropped out this time. Once again, we're talking with Juan Castillas, coming to you live. I'm not live from Caracas, but he is. Talking about the situation there, talking about the politics, the economics, and the current unrest that is really plaguing the country in the face of a lot of poverty, extreme disparity. Um, excuse me, all of which has been more or less exacerbated or brought about by um, socialist measures, a forcible authoritarian effort to basically do away, dispel inequality. And the result has been more inequality than what we see here in the US. The result has been more poverty than what we see in the US, more scarcity, more unrest, more death, more crime, um, more of everything bad and less of everything good. So we've been talking about that for the last, you know what, I don't even know how long we've been going now. I don't have a counter going on my screen, but he should be back here in the next minute or so. We actually had a Jaime, sorry, Jaime Juan, Jimmy John's. Um, I haven't eaten yet today, so my blood sugars get a little bit low. But I am not one to complain given what I'm hearing about Venezuela. But we have been discussing that. In fact, you're back. Yes.
all right.
So you worked. I was just recapping, of course, doing our little station identification thing there. Um, so you used to work a place in front of a street light.
Yeah.
What did you see there?
So every couple of hours there was a mugging. Like, every at first it was every day at least once, and then it was like every 3 hours, like twice a day, 3 times a day. A couple of, people in motorbikes just pulled over to the side of the cars, and they would knock on the window with the butt of the gun and ask for the phone and the purse.
Jeez.
And it usually happened to guess who? Guess who?
Probably
Get
the businessman. Yeah.
No, 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 no. It's far more ironic.
Government officials.
No. Oh, I wish. No, no, no. Who do progressive what is one of the protected classes of progressive uh intelligentsia, I guess.
Academics.
Protected. I would the protected class think like a criminal who's less likely to have a gun, who's less likely to hurt you. Who do you think you can get away with, oppressing?
Uh, Legal citizens in that case.
Women.
Women.
Women alone. Women alone in cars are the primary victim of muggings in Venezuela.
See, I know too many women in America that carry guns. That's why I'm not. I'm having
Oh yeah,
a
but that's disallowed here.
correct because you are not allowed to defend yourself. So women hit hardest, definitely, then by the muggings, and of course they're scared because they just want to get home.
Yeah. 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 I had a person close to me once that she's a woman and she was in the car with another woman and she's close. And she told me of a time that a couple of people in motorbikes pulled over and they wrapped the window with the butt of the gun, with the tip of the gun.
Hmm.
And she was at the red light. She was stopped at a red light, somewhere different from the one I'm talking about. So it happens all over the city. And she says, "Well, I just pretended I didn't understand what was going on, and then the light changed, and I floored it."
Oh, ballsy move, and it apparently
Yeah,
paid off.
yeah. Sometimes it pays off. It happened to me once as well. I usually carry a useless phone, right?
Hmm.
So men are less likely to get away with that sort of move
Yeah.
because you're more likely to be aggressed against, and just out of pure rage. And so what I did was I rolled down the window and I asked, "Well, what do you want?" You can't control what you do exactly. This has happened to me twice, but this one particular time, I just gave him a fake phone. Like I carry a phone
Mhm.
with a battery, but it's a cheap old phone. It was, I don't know, it was one of those old flip phones that I already
Mhm.
discarded. But you keep your old phone because you use it as a decoy.
Yeah, the stand-in.
Yeah, the stand-in. So I just gave him that. The other time I was mugged and it was real bad, really bad. He actually took away my my real phone. I was taking pictures for work, and this guy just I feel like a motorbike comes behind me, and I get like shoved or pushed or screamed at, and I turned around and I was about to clock the guy. I was about to ask what the hell is going on, and was about to shove the guy, and all of a sudden I find myself looking at the barrel of a gun, and he cocks it in front of my face and puts it right between my eyes. And he said,
Mhm. You've gotta be kidding me. Right then, we lose the internet. Stick around to hear the rest of the story here, folks. We'll get our internet in Venezuela back here in a moment. Obviously, quite a bit of crime going on there, despite the illegality of weapons. Um, despite the nature of the country being supposedly more safe through its heavy-handed laws, the country is quite a bit less safe. It is the ultimate cliffhanger. It is. I couldn't ask for a better cliffhanger here than what we have. And I think, let's see, left group chat. So he'll pop. There we go. That was, you're back. Yes.
"Yeah, what was
That
that?"
that was the ultimate cliffhanger right there. You said he put the gun between my eyes, he cocked it, and then you just disappeared, and we all are sitting here going, "You've got to be kidding me!"
Yeah, well, evidently I wasn't shot because I'm here.
Yes.
But he cocked it and just very slowly put the gun. He stared and he was staring and fixed, like ready. He was ready. So I very slowly put the phone in his hand and I stayed put, looking back at him because if you move, if you back away, backing away is probably the worst thing you can do. because you're putting yourself out of you're putting him out of your reach, but you're still within the reach of the gun. That's
Yes.
stupid. So I just stared at him and waited for him to leave, and he left. I remember at the time being really, really, really scared, and then really, really pissed.
I have had a motorbike stolen here in the US, and the feeling of helplessness and anger. I wasn't even there. It was stolen on Halloween night. It was stolen from out in front of my my apartment in Phoenix, and just feeling anger. But I was not, I felt pissed personally, but I was not personally assaulted in that process. So I can only imagine that what you felt was magnified times, just exponentially,
Yeah,
just exponentially.
yeah.
Have all of your friends or family or people that you know at some point been mugged?
I think it's safe to say that about 80% of the people I know have been mugged.
And mugged within probably the last year or two?
I don't know in general.
In general? Okay.
Since this whole thing began. Some people have left, and some people left a long time ago. Yeah, but since this whole thing began, yeah, definitely. Some people have been mugged even more than once. I know kidnapping victims. I know have friends who've been in really serious situations, home invasions as well.
And are most kidnapping victims ransomed?
Oh yeah, yes. Although I was briefly kidnapped myself, I guess you could call it a brief kidnapping because we were held at. I was in an incident when we were held. What do you call it? When there was a robbery, right? And we were all held in the premises for a long time.
Yeah, hold up, or a hostage situation.
Yeah, except the police didn't get there on time, so they just basically took everything and left us in a room tied with zip ties and I think they used duct tape.
That's just, we hear about things in America like that, makes the nightly news because it is so uncommon to have a hostage situation like that. So it'll make the news and, makes the rounds. And then, eventually, of course, it wears off like all things do. It sounds like if the news were to cover such events there, that the news would cover nothing else but robberies and kidnappings. Yeah, we lost him. Usually I hear a little bit of a glitch before it goes, but unfortunately not at this time so much.
Yeah.
And you're back. There you go. Yeah. Hey.
You were saying that you would hear that in the nightly news. Nah, this isn't even, it didn't even get a write-up. It was just Saturday.
That's a heck of a Saturday, man. That's a much worse Saturday than today from the sounds of it.
Yeah.
In terms of your personal situation, I know people are going to want me to ask this. Relatively, you're personally safe, at least in your own home, correct?
Yeah. Well, the way I would put it is there's a 99% chance that I'm safe and that I'm quite safe, and there's a 1% chance that I'm extremely unsafe.
That you might be targeted by the government.
Or something,
Okay.
It could be that the government decides to target me if it decides to take the time out of its very busy agenda maintaining power right now, because I'm sure they have much larger concerns at this point. But they could do that. They could also, send their armed clash groups, like they're armed, like the colectivos, their version of Antifa, I would guess, to wreak, pandemonium to unleash pandemonium on the population at large, and I could be the victim of a random attack in a random place at a random time. And then there's the crime.
Yes, on top of all that.
Yeah.
Lexi is asking, what kind of news coverage do you get? I think that laugh says a lot more than me.
All right. So the Venezuelan news media is either openly pro-government, controlled by the government, or controlled by people who are, uh, in the government's pocket. Like this Gorin guy that I told you about who had
Mhm.
embezzled $1 billion of public funds. He owns one of the government channels. And the news that we get, like the other day, there's a news media person who's very outspoken here, and he has a program at 6 in the morning when everybody's getting up for work, from 6 to 8. And he's the
Ah, and we lose him again. Hopefully he'll bounce back really quickly like he did this last time. For those of you just joining us or have tuned in part of the way through, I am the Unfiltered Christian. You can call me Chris, and we are interviewing Jaime Castillas in Caracas, Venezuela, talking about the situation there. Obviously, not a good situation. And you're back.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So the morning program, 6 to 8 in the morning.
Yeah, this guy has always been very outspoken against the government, and he's outspoken in a very, I would say, elegant way.
Okay.
Well, the day after the whole Guaido incident, after the proclamation, the swearing in, his show was basically just a long musical interlude. And it would later came out that if anyone in that station, in that entire radio circuit, mentioned the name Guaido, that the station, the entire circuit would be shut down. All the licenses for the use of the radio airways would be revoked.
Are there any pirate outlets for media, or are you getting all your media pretty much through WhatsApp and Twitter and such?
We get them through independent media reporters, like independent reporters or independent, outlets that have formed. Like Efecto Cocuyo, for instance, is one of them, and internet television stations as well, like Vivo Play. These are things that have sprung up, out of the need for real news, because the officially controlled media is not fit for purpose.
It's basically a propaganda outlet at this point, correct?
Yeah, they're all either propaganda outlets or, very, you can control, you can basically erase entire things or change the meaning of everything through the way you cover something. You're probably familiar with it. You've seen it.
Oh yeah.
You've seen it in the US.
Well, I mean, we're seeing it now with what's going on there being called a coup, and it's like that. This isn't even accurate within the definition of what a coup actually is. Much less, it becomes even less accurate, even more inaccurate when you look at the actual situation on the ground in Caracas.
It becomes the opposite of. It becomes the exact, like, somehow. There are certain, I don't know even if to say that media outlets in general, but reporters specifically, in the way they cover things, they manage to get everything exactly the opposite of how it is.
Yeah.
So a coup, right, is usually a military insurrection that against the legitimate power of a nation, right? Well, in this case, all the laws were, the National Assembly, that National Assembly, that was the last body that was created, that was elected fairly in the country, was following the letter of the law when they designated its president as the interim president. That's the letter of the law. Maduro is being backed into power by the military. If you want to make an argument for the coup, you'd probably have to point your finger at Maduro.
Because he is holding power with the military illegally against the legitimately elected powers.
Yes. Well, he's trying to hold power illegitimately, yeah. He's de facto holding power, not de jure.
Right. And he is the status quo.
And he is the status quo, yeah. So
all that.
So it kind of feels like he should be in power because he's the status quo, but that's not the case. He's not legitimate anymore.
Yes. Well, and Lexi just mentioned this. We have a reporter here, a rather self-absorbed reporter named Jim
Jim
Acosta.
Acosta.
Yes. Dear Diary Jim.
Yeah. I've seen that. I've seen that.
And he's writing a book on the dangers of telling the truths in Trump's America, which will get published and distributed and promoted in Trump's America.
Well,
that
I'll
from
tell you what.
Lexi.
I'll tell you what, Alexi. There was a scandal recently that was covered by the media about kids from a high school, a Catholic high school, the Covington High School, right? Turns out that whole altercation involved 3 groups. One of them was a group of activists, if you could call them that, who are very aggressive and very
anti-Semitic
and denigrating in their methods and in the way they address the public at large. They are very radical, and I don't think that they are beyond, causing violence and trouble. The other party involved was a man who has been lying to the media for a long time, who is also an activist, and he's also engaged in, let's say, questionable practices. And the third...
Maduro does not want us to hear the third group. The internet slipping away. Let's see if we get him back in a moment. We've had some really great bounce backs. There was one where we lost him for a good couple minutes there, and then most of these we've only lost him for
situation.
There we go, and you're back. So the third group, of course, as you were saying, is the Covington high schoolers.
Who are about as innocent as eating pie in a Sweet 16 party. Oh, yeah, so the media managed to invert the situation perfectly, like a perfect inversion.
And we lose him again. Yes, indeed. He is right, though. The media has very much inverted a lot of these situations and made them anything but true. And I think this is, of course, where we get that beloved term, fake news. And you're back.
Okay.
And you were saying that the media managed to invert the situation just perfectly, get it completely backwards.
Yeah. And that's a problem. Now, I don't know if it's an ideologically driven problem. I don't know how much of it is willful malice and how much of it is incentive structures working against, the industry, the news industry. But the fact
his neighbor must be running a torrent or looking at pictures or something like that on the interwebs. It's killing his feed. Either that or the Venezuelan government is Googling how to ruin a country and get out alive. One of the two. Again, we will hope for a fortnight. I kind of have my doubts. I don't know that they can afford computers that would run Fortnite. Yes, wear a MAGA hat. Hashtag Orange Man bad. So Nathan Phillips good. I think you see some tribalism there. I also think one of the problems with the news media in America is that they lost the plot. And you're back. Hey, you're back again.
Yeah. Great internet here in Venezuela. Okay. So the media has a problem. The fact that they don't have instantiated language to classify their stories. Like they could just very easily say, this is a hot take. There's a first take, subject to change. They could write that at the end of any write-up that they do, or right below the title, story and development. They could do that. There could be a standard for that.
But there is not. We lost him again. Somebody must have figured out the torrents there in Caracas. Fortnite is evil to inflict on an already suffering country. Agreed. Agreed. I've seen the videos. I've seen Rep Zion's own struggles with that program. But yes, I do think the media in America has lost the plot a little bit because the media should be questioning the narrative slightly of every group, of every power, of every narrative, and they don't. It does seem like they play favorites, and it seems like this has been more and more of a problem since the Iraq War, when the media seem to be a little bit derelict in the United States of questioning the narrative and questioning some assumptions. But I see this very much as an issue that is not going to be solved easily, especially when you see some of the material that quote unquote journalists turn out as quote unquote news. It's difficult not to make crab rave memes when certain journalists get canned. And I hear your mic. Are you back with us?
Yep, I'm back.
Awesome.
I'm back. Looking at some of the crab rave memes on Twitter after the BuzzFeed journalists decided to implement their priorities and disband their national news desk and and leave the LGBT desk on because, priorities.
Priorities. I may have been guilty of a meme or a spicy meme or two about the there was a little bit of Schadenfreude, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Their learn to
Well,
code memes are also all over the place on Twitter. Yeah.
I will take credit for retweeting a few of those.
Yeah. And the Guaido challenge is also on Twitter. Have you seen that? That was the best. So our Ministry of of Communications, they decided that they were going to publish news about a secret meeting that Guaido had held with the government authorities and with Diosdado Cabello and Bernal in a hotel in Caracas.
Yes.
And they basically took your avatar, and they took a shaky picture of it, and they said that's Guaido, and so everybody's been making fun of that, all day. They're calling it the Guaido challenge, and they're just basically using memes of people in hoodies doing questionable things, like being on the beach. It's like, look, Guaido's on the beach, and some people are putting their hoodies on dogs and say having dinner, and they're feeding the dog through the hoodie.
I'm going to just post on Twitter, my avatar equals Guaido challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically it.
That is awesome. So we'll go ahead and send that out. Maybe a few of my Venezuelan friends will get a kick out of it. So it has been absolutely awesome to talk with you. I don't know that there's anything that, is there anything that we here in America can do? And are there any NGOs or anybody able to do any good in Venezuela at the moment that we can help? Or are we pretty much all just holding our breath to see what happens next?
Well, in the coming days, the Guaido government is going to start, officiating, I guess, implementing the good offices necessary to get diplomatic help and help from NGOs, like humanitarian aid from NGOs to the country. I don't know yet which NGOs are going to be participating in the process of helping out, but there's people who desperately need help, and just keep abreast of the situation of which are the NGOs that are going to be coming here and helping out. So you could maybe donate to them, or specifically tell them that this is for the Venezuelan funds that they're probably going to be setting up in the next few days.
Excellent. Well, we'll stay on top of it here. I know I'm going to be monitoring Twitter for some of our friends or mutuals, and just seeing what happens over the next coming days. And if there are big events, are you open to coming back on stream and bringing us some updates live from the ground?
Sure, absolutely. And there's like 1,000 things we didn't cover because
I know
situation just spools infinitely into a web of things that are interesting and that somehow parallel the happenings all over the world as well, and things that probably people should know. But there's 1,000 things that we could just hold this for 14 hours straight and still not hit everything. But
I absolutely believe it. After going through basically 2 colleges for 2 degrees related to political science, yes, I feel like I barely even scratched the surface over the course of years, and I can imagine here it's just as complicated as that. But hopefully, we'll get to stream again here this next week. Let me know what days are good for you, just in the DMs, and hopefully we'll get something going.
All right, awesome. Oh, one last note for your
Of course.
listeners, to follow the Organization of American States on Twitter, Luis Almagro. He's probably a good person to follow on Twitter.
Excellent.
And
What is
Diego, sorry.
what's his Twitter handle?
Oh, so see, I gotta be more media savvy. I should have had this right ready to kick it off.
Oh.
Hold on.
Well, I'll link it here in the chat if you can tell me. My Spanish is terrible, despite living in Mexico for 4 months at one point.
Okay, so his Twitter handle is Almagro. Hold on, let me say the whole thing. Almagro _OEA 2015. So here we go. It's ALMAGRO _OEA 2015.
OEA 2015. I just found him.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you saying that I don't speak Spanish, well, it's okay. Neither do I. Twitter has an amazing translate function, which tends to get the message across quite well, actually.
It's really good. The translate function. It's really good on Twitter.
It is. And then who's the other account we should be following?
Well, you probably might want to follow Juan Guaido.
Yes.
Because he's been very open about the agendas and the actions that are, taking place. So let me find him.
Is it J Guaido?
Yeah, that's it.
Excellent. And I'll type that in the chat right now.
And you know what? Just for the fun of it, follow Maduro. Follow him and check out what he's tweeting.
And be able to compare the two.
Yeah, follow him and check out the Ministry of Propaganda.
So which is at Nicolas
Maduro. Yeah,
without an H, because in America we do spell Nicolas with an H usually.
Yes, no, it's without the H.
Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah, he's desperate, so it's going to be a fun. That's just, if you ever wondered what it is that a regime looks like when it's toppling.
And compare what you see on Twitter in terms of the photos of people being beaten and being shot on the streets, which I've seen videos. Compare all of the media coming from people's phones who are seeing it unfold in front of them, and then to compare it with his Twitter account has got to be quite interesting indeed.
Yes. Hold on. There's a let me see if I can find. Oh boy. Let me see if I can find one of those official accounts for the human rights organizations that are documenting these things.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have them ready.
It's all right. I hadn't expected to be on Twitter much during the stream, except just to retweet the link out there for everybody. But.
Oh, well, fair enough. No, if I find them, I'll send them to you over on the DMs, and you can put them on the comments, I guess,
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just edit the video after the fact and put them in the description down below. Look for those Twitter handles to follow in the description down below, and that way you can be informed as it happens, as it unfolds.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, let's hope for a stream maybe this next week. And I think we'll get more people in the stream this next week. Saturdays are always kind of a slow day on YouTube and Twitter, it seems. But what's really important is that this will be here. For those of you listening, this will stay up, and you'll be able to listen to it and get some perspective, not only of the history and the economics of what's happening in Venezuela, but also the political side of things, the socialist aspect, all of this, the corruption, and get a more understanding and more wisdom from a ground level view rather than from a processed media view. So,
perfect.
Awesome. Excellent. Jaime, thank you so much. It has been awesome, and stay safe out there, man.
All right, will do. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. And for all of you, once again, that was Jaime Castillas. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for tuning in, whether you're watching this on the replay, whether you were with us for the whole live stream. I really do appreciate it. If you like the video, go ahead, give it a thumbs up. That helps engagement. If you really liked the video, you could share it. And if you really liked me and the video, you can even sub to the channel. I do appreciate it. Usually I talk a little bit of culture, politics, everything. You can see my videos and see if that's something you'd like to see in your subscription list. Of course, you can follow me on the Twitter. I'm there till Jack bans me. I am at No Filter Christian, but I am NOFILTERCHRISTN, Unfiltered Christian, and you can find me on there. Lexi, I believe that's the Maduro English. That's the English translated feed of Maduro, from what I can tell. Hugs to you as well. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next time.